Hi everyone, it's Miss Phillips here. So I hope you're all well and that you've all been managing to make the most of your time at home with schoolwork, spending time with family, exercise and lots of other things. I've been trying to keep busy. I've been doing lots of lesson planning work, lots of reading. I'm currently reading My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier, which is brilliant if anyone wants to give it a go. I'm also doing some bits of yoga and I'm going to have a go at baking some brownies later on. Anyway, I know that you've all been working really hard annotating the lost poems in your anthology, and what we're going to be moving on to now is thinking about comparing those 4 poems. Now, because this is a little bit more challenging and it takes some more instruction, I've decided to make this video to go alongside it. Now, thank you for tuning in, and I do hope that you find this helpful. So, we need to try and get in the right frame of mind now. So picture the scenes. We're in school, it's Friday period 2. We're in room 205 today, remember, not 202. We've come in, we've got our whiteboards out, we've made a start on the do now. I'm doing the register. Adam's probably working out whether to say good morning or good afternoon to me. Leah's still getting a pen out. Bronte's trying to ask me what I'm doing at the weekend to distract me. So we're good to go, okay? Right, just a bit of a recap as to where we're at so far. So we know that in our love and relationships cluster there are 15 poems in total. Now, to make this easier for revision purposes, I've divided those 15 poems into 3 subcategories. So we've got our family poems, and we've covered all of these whilst we're in school. Now, hopefully, you should have covered and annotated these 4 lost poems this week and last week. So we've got When We Two Parted, Neutral Tones, Porphyria's Lover and The Farmer's Bride. So hopefully you've been able to annotate in your anthologies, complete your Cornell notes and complete your revision wheels. So what we're going to be thinking about now is comparing these 4 lost poems. And our learning intention for this session is to create a comparative essay plan for the lost poems. Now, when we talk about loss, these 4 poems explore loss in different ways. So we've got When We Two Parted, and this was written by Lord Byron, and this explores loss in terms of heartbreak. So something that we do need to know in terms of context about this is that this is an autobiographical poem, as is Neutral Tones, and in When We Two Parted, Byron is reflecting on and expressing his heartbreak in response to a relationship that he had with a lady called Lady Frances Webster. And that was actually an affair. So, Lady Frances Webster was married to one of Lord Byron's friends, and that's how he met her, and they started having an affair. And When We Two Parted is based on that affair ending. Neutral Tones, very similar, also explores heartbreak, and this is written by Thomas Hardy. And in this poem, and again, similar to When We Two Parted, Hardy's thinking about and reflecting on a relationship ending in the past, and then he comments on how even though lots of time has passed, that heartbreak is still intense, and he cannot let go, and he cannot move past that painful experience. Then we've got Porphyria's Lover. So this is the one that's a little bit weird, and something that we do need to be clear on this in terms of this poem is that the poet Robert Browning is not the speaker of the poem. So, the person who murders Porphyria is a fictional narrator. That is a made-up narrator that Robert Browning has created. It is not Robert Browning himself that goes around murdering women by strangling them with their hair. And students say to me all the time, "But miss, why would he write this poem? Surely if he wrote this poem telling how he murdered someone, he's going to get arrested," okay? No, it is not Robert Browning, it is a fictional person. And important context about this is that porphyria in the 19th century was actually a disease which resulted in madness. And Robert Browning was really interested in psychology at the time that he wrote this poem, which explains this idea of the narrator's loss of sanity. So straight away within this title, Robert Browning is alluding to themes of sanity, because we know that porphyria results in insanity. And also we see that through the narrator's behaviour. The fact that he murders his lover clearly references that he is insane. And in terms of loss, we've got elements of loss of control. So this is a really interesting poem because it explores love, but destructive love. And it's this idea that love, if it is controlled, can be a really wonderful thing. However, if it is allowed to get out of control and it spirals, it can become destructive, and it can become toxic and unhealthy. And that's exactly what's going on here. He loves Porphyria too much, to the point where he wants to keep her forever, and he objectifies her and he dehumanises her, and he treats her like an object that belongs to him because his love is so intense for her. And because of that, he loses control over himself and he decides to murder her because he wants to preserve the moment where he believes that she truly loves him at that moment in time. We've also got loss of freedom in terms of Porphyria herself. So she is objectified, she is treated like an object, and she is dehumanised by the narrator. There's lots of references to her almost being like an angel. He absolutely idolises her, and as a result of that, he takes away her freedom, he murders her so that he can have complete control over her. The Farmer's Bride, again, also very interesting when we think about context. So this was written by Charlotte Mew, and Charlotte Mew was actually a homosexual at a time where it was illegal to be so. And all of these poems were written in the 19th century. Now, this is interesting because, similar to Porphyria's lover, Charlotte Mew is different to the narrator in the poem. So the narrator in the poem is a farmer, and he has married a girl who is much younger than him. And the whole poem is centred around this idea that, to him, he thinks that she should be fulfilling the role of a housewife, and that is someone who is there to look after the house and to have sex with him and to raise a family. But the bride is very reluctant to do that. She's a lot younger than the farmer. She's terrified by him. They don't have an emotional connection. The farmer has got no interest in making that emotional connection because he sees her role as purely practical. And we've got a lot of sexual frustration that is presented in this poem. And again, when we think about Charlotte Mew being homosexual and her sexuality being oppressed, we see the relation between the two, and the idea that Charlotte Mew is using the farmer to represent her own sexual frustration. Charlotte Mew also struggled with depression throughout her life and very tragically committed suicide. So when we're thinking about loss in terms of this poem, we've got loss of freedom. And another key thing about this is that it's set in a patriarchal society, and those gender roles come through very strongly. So we know that the farmer is superior, the farmer is the one in control and he's dominant. We know that the bride is expected to be subservient to him. She's supposed to clean the house, she's supposed to have sex with him. However, she's still trying to maintain some freedom by refusing to do that. She does clean the house, but they do sleep in separate bedrooms, and we get the sense that she hasn't given into him sexually as of yet. Identity as well. So this title really does show that patriarchal society, because if we look here, we are not told the name of the bride. We are told that the bride belongs to the farmer. So we've got the possessive apostrophe. She is the farmer's possession. So we get the sense that in a patriarchal society, women were not treated as humans. They were treated as property. And that comes through because she doesn't have an identity. The poet purposely doesn't give her a name because a name is absolute fundamentals of your identity, and when that's taken away from you, it dehumanises you in some way. So that is why it's called the Farmer's Bride, to show that she is belonging to the farmer. And then we've also got the sense of a loss of control. So towards the end of the poem, and this is a structural device, it becomes quite sinister, and we can see that over the course of the poem, so it starts off in the summer and then it leads towards winter, the farmer is becoming more and more sexually frustrated, to the point where at the end of the poem, the poet actually foreshadows that he may end up taking his bride by force and raping her. And that is shown through the fragmented language. So he makes a comment about her appearance and he's imagining her sleeping upstairs in the attic, and he says, oh, there was only a stair between us. And then he starts thinking about her eyes and her hair, and it gets really sexual. And what Mew is actually doing there is foreshadowing that he will take her by force. And then we've also got the absence of affection within this relationship. It is a marriage of convenience. To him, she is there to serve him in terms of housework and raising a family. Okay, so these are all lost poems. Now, the resources that you've got to help you with this is you've got your annotated poems in your anthology, you've got your Cornell notes, you've got your revision wheels and your boxes, and I've also added some examples of revision wheels from The Farmer's Bride and Porphyria's Lover, which I've stolen from Faye, so thank you very much for that. You've also got your comparative Venn diagrams, you've got your poetry analysis terminology when we're trying to think about techniques, which is on slide 6. We've got our success criteria on slide 7. And then in your exercise books, what I'd like you to do, please, is recreate the grid template, which I'll show you in a second. So you should only need one A4 page, that should be enough. And then I've also added, which I think are really useful, and I will start sending more of these out when we come to look at the rest of the poems, are some knowledge organisers for each poem, and I'll come to those in a second. Okay, so we've got our terminology there, we've got our success criteria, and then this is our task for this session. So what I would like you to make a start on today is to complete the comparative grid. And today we're only going to be thinking about comparing how poets present heartbreak in When We Two Parted by Lord Byron and Neutral Tones by Thomas Hardy. Then when you've completed that grid, what I'd like you to do, please, is self-assess it using the success criteria on slide 7 with a different coloured pen. So you can annotate it, you can number it, whatever you choose to do, but please make sure that those skills are embedded consistently all the way through your grid. Okay, then here we've got our When We Two Parted knowledge organiser and our Neutral Tones knowledge organiser. So I think these are really useful because we've got different boxes for the things that we need to think about if we were to write an essay. And that is context and content, language, themes and emotions. So I won't talk through all of these boxes, but some key things that I would just like to point out. It is absolutely crucial that you are aware of the context when we two parted. So, just to recap, Lord Byron, he was a 19th century poet, he was a romantic poet, as was Thomas Hardy, and we've touched on this in class, but Romanticism, very simply, was an artistic and literary movement which puts emphasis on expression of emotion. And generally, the way that the poets would do that is through nature. So a romantic poet commonly would express emotions through nature. And both Hardy and Byron were romantic poets. And then we know that this poem is written, or was written about, Lady Frances Webster. So Lady Frances Webster was married to one of Byron's friends called James Webster, and that's how they met. They actually met at a house party. And they struck up an affair and that ended. Now, Lady Frances Webster actually went on to have an affair with the Duke of Wellington. And it was when Lord Byron found out about this that he decided to write the poem, okay? And what we need to remember is that affairs in the 19th century were absolutely scandalous. And there were lots of references to the fact that Byron, in the poem, has got to contain a lot of his emotions. He's got to repress them. He cannot be open about that relationship ending because it was absolutely scandalous to have an affair in the 19th century. So there were lots of opportunities in the poem to make contextual links to the fact that it was an affair, which is why he needs to keep his emotions secret, and probably why he chose to write the poem as a way to express his emotion, and it would have been quite cathartic to get that out on the page because he wasn't able to have those conversations with other people about how he felt. Okay, then we've got some language features, we've got themes, we've got the poem and some line-by-line analysis, ideas for what poems you might want to compare it to, and the poet's influence. Then Thomas Hardy, again, same sort of stuff. I'll just point out some important context information. So Thomas Hardy, he was an English novelist, and he wrote Tess of the D'Urbervilles amongst many other novels, but that's my absolute favourite. So if anyone wants to give Tess of the D'Urbervilles a go, I would definitely recommend that. And what we need to know about Thomas Hardy is that he was famous for his pessimistic tone. And we really do see that in Neutral Tones. He was very pessimistic, very cynical in the tone of his writing, and that comes across very strongly through the poem itself. Now, in terms of this specific poem, it's not clear whether the poem is based on one relationship ending or whether it's a reflection on his entire experiences of love as a whole. But what we do know, which is important, is that he was married to a lady called Emma, and she died in 1912. Now, after this, he went on to marry another person called Emily. However, during this marriage, he remained preoccupied with the death of Emma. And when he died, his heart, so not his entire body, just his heart, was buried next to Emma's body. So we do get the sense that he's experienced that heartbreak and that he's not able to move past it or to let it go. And that impact is stuck with him even in the present day. Okay? And again, he was a romantic poet, so we see that in Neutral Tones because we've got lots of references of pathetic fallacy. Hardy talks about the God-cursed sun, meaning that the sun is white because it's been told not to shine by God because it expresses the negativity of that relationship ending. We know that it's set in winter, connotations of winter, death, things being starved of things that they need to grow and to flourish, again symbolic of that relationship. That relationship is dying because it's not been nourished with the things that it needs to survive. We've also got the references to an ash tree. Again, really important. Ash is what is left over after something is burnt out. So it's not accidental that Hardy is chosen to refer to an ash tree in the poem. What he's suggesting there is that all the love is burnt out of that relationship and all that's left now is grey ash. Okay, so do look out for that pathetic fallacy and that use of nature in the poem. Then we've got our language, we've got our poem and our analysis, we've got our themes, and then we've got our poems for comparison, okay? So these should be useful when you come to fill in this grid here. Now, what you might want to do at this point is pause the video and recreate this template in your exercise book because I'm going to briefly talk you through it and you might want to make some notes on it as I'm talking through. So, the two poems that we're going to focus on today in relation to heartbreak are When We Two Parted and Neutral Tones. And the way that I've set this out is it's essentially an essay plan. So we know that the four cornerstones when we're thinking about poetry are the content, what is it about, the themes, the emotions, and how it is structured. And what we need to be thinking about is how the content is similar or different in both poems, how the themes are similar or different, emotions similar or different, structure similar or different. And then what we will practice is using these to write up essays. So essentially, all we would need to do is write a comparative peak twirl on the content, talking about both of these quotes, a comparative peak twirl on the themes, talking about both of these, comparative on emotions, and comparative on structure. So it's just a really good way to get it straight in your head before you come to put it together as a complete essay. Now, to help you out a little bit, I've filled in the similarities and the differences for each of these aspects here. You don't need to talk about all of them because you wouldn't have the time to write about all of them in an essay, in an exam situation. So just choose the ones that you will feel confident analysing and the ones that you think are pertinent to what you want to say. So let's start with content. Now, it is really important, Year 10, that we do think about the similarities or differences first before we fill in these boxes with our quotes and our analysis, because our essays need to flow and they need to be connected, and what we don't want to be doing is falling into the trap of just analysing this quote and then just analysing that quote but not making any comparative links. So essentially, this is your overarching point for your comparative peak twirl. what is the content and how is it similar or how is it different, and how is that expressed and portrayed through the language in the quotes that you've chosen. So I've said here that both explore the lasting impact of heartbreak, and the poets are still lamenting the breakdown of relationships in the past. And we know that both of these are autobiographical. The narrators in the poem are the poets themselves. They're also both romantic poets, and they are both written in the 19th century. So, we also know, as a bit of a top tip, that whenever we are doing our content paragraph, we always use the title as our quotations. And that's just a really quick win, because it means that we're starting our essays off confidently. I'm hoping that we can all at least remember some titles of the poem, so it just gives us a bit of a basis to go from. Now, what I would like you to do in these boxes is choose your quotations, write them out, and then I would like you to annotate them in the form of a peaked twirl. So, these are the pointers. We've got our points, we've got our suggests with an alternate inferences, and that is really important if we're aiming for our grade 7 to 9. Range of keywords, range of techniques, and please use your terminology slide that I've put on this PowerPoint to help you with that. You've also got the glossary in the back of your exercise books. Writer's intention, or in this case it would be the poet's intention. Reader's reaction. Links to context where relevant. Now remember, we do not need to be shoving context in unless it naturally fits. So you do not need to talk about context in every single box, only where it's relevant to the analysis that you're making. And then links. So we do need a comparative comment. How is it similar or different to this poem here? Okay? So, I won't go through all of them, but some things that are important in relation to this title, when we two parted. So straight away, just from reading that, Byron is indicating to the reader that this is a heartbreak poem. It is not an idealised, romantic, positive love poem, because we've got the verb parted, and that's in the semantic field of separation, and that runs all the way through the poem. Okay? So, semantic field of separation, make sure you get that down and look out for other words throughout the rest of the poem. We've also got we and two and parted. And what's going on here is that we is a collective pronoun. And what that does is it juxtaposes parted. Because what Byron is emphasising here is that once him and Lady Frances Webster were a we. They were a unison. And he can make a link to context. So we know that the we that he's referring to there is himself and Lady Frances Webster. And they were once together. However, in the present tense, that is no longer the case, and now they are parted. So we've got the juxtaposition of unison and separation through the verb parted. We've also got the time adverbial when, and that's really important because what both poets use in terms of structure is the alternation between the past and the present. So both poems start with the past, and both poets are thinking about the actual moment in time when that relationship ended. And then the ends of the poems flip to the present tense, where both of the poets are still expressing that pain is still as strong and they are still trapped in that heartbreak and they can't move past it, okay? So when we're thinking about when, that's really important in terms of the timings of both poems, okay? And in terms of our link, we would say that that is similar because neutral tones is also very negative, and it's also in relation to heartbreak and a relationship ending. Now, neutral tones, this in terms of the actual poem itself is a little bit misleading because tones is a noun and it just means emotions. Neutral is the adjective that describes the emotions. And neutral has really got connotations as sort of being indifferent and a little bit nonchalant, a little bit blank and empty. If you think about neutral colours, we've got sort of white, very plain, very empty, very neutral, okay? And when we first read that, it does suggest to the reader that actually Hardy feels indifferent towards love. He's sort of unfazed by it. However, that does contrast and juxtapose the feelings that are presented in the poem, because what comes across very powerfully is that Hardy feels very strong resentment, very strong anger, and very strong pain associated with his experiences of love. So then we've got to ask ourselves and question, well, if that emotion is presented so strongly in the poem, why does he choose to title it Neutral Tones? And I think the reason for that is, what Hardy is getting at, is that because he has been so traumatised by love that he's now essentially given up on it. And it's very defeatist, and it's very dejected in his tone and his attitudes. So really what's going on here is Hardy's wanting us to know that now he's very sceptical towards love. He's got a very pessimistic attitude towards it. He doesn't want to bother anymore. He's indifferent towards it. He's essentially given up because he's been so traumatised and so hurt by it. Okay? So that's essentially the significance of the title. So, when you've written the quotes, please can you do some annotations following our repeatable structure. Then I would like you to move on to themes. Now for themes, you've got a bit of freedom here. You don't necessarily need to analyse the theme that's in the title, because if you do that, you fall into the danger of essentially just repeating what we've already said here. So I would advise you to choose a different theme. So you might want to talk about separation. You might want to talk about the theme of memory, completely up to you. And again, you've got the freedom in the sense that you don't need to explore the same theme for both poems, because a comparison is both similarities and differences. So it's completely up to you. If you wanted to analyse separation in When We Two Parted and separation in Neutral Tones and talk about how they are similar, go for it. But if you wanted to do separation in When We Two Parted and something completely different in Neutral Tones, then go for it, okay? And then make sure that you are making those comparisons. Another thing to think about as well is, in terms of your comparisons, be really careful in what you're saying, as in, both poems do explore heartbreak. However, there are some slight differences in relation to that heartbreak. So please don't make sort of generalised statements about, oh, well, this is similar because both poems explore heartbreak. Well, yeah, that is correct, but think about it in a more subtle way and try and really pick that apart and think, what is the similarity? Or actually, are they both about heartbreak, but then there are differences within that? So just bear that in mind. And then you would choose your quotes here, write them down, and then annotate. And this is where hopefully your Cornell notes and your revision wheels will come in useful. Then we've also got emotions, and again I've given you a choice of emotions here. Please don't try to analyse all of them because that won't be possible, but choose the ones that you feel most confident with and that you can find supporting quotes for. And again, you might want to talk about the same emotion, or you might want to talk about differences. Now structure. The key thing to remember here with these poems in relation to structure is that both of them are cyclical structures, and that is, they start and end in the same way. So if we think about a cycle, which is like a circle, starts and then goes back round, okay? Now, the reason why the poets have done that is it's not accidental, it is done with an intention. And the intention behind that is to represent that both poets are trapped in a cycle of grief and they cannot move past that heartbreak. And even though those relationships ended a very long time ago, that pain is still soul destroying, and it is still as intense as it was when that relationship originally ended. So the cyclical structure represents that they are trapped in that cycle of grief, okay? And then one slight difference in terms of structure is that Neutral Tones is very monosyllabic, and that is to create a dejected tone. And Miss Burry says this all the time, so she really hates reading Neutral Tones. She thinks it's so boring because of the way that it's structured, and it's very flat and it's very monotone and it's very monosyllabic. But Hardy does that on purpose. Remember, he's now neutral towards love. He doesn't want to show any enthusiasm. He doesn't want to show any passion. He doesn't want to sort of create this pattern with his rhyme scheme, because that would defeat the object of the poem. And the object of the poem is to show that he doesn't care about love. And that is why it is so boring and so monosyllabic and so robotic in the way that it's structured. So that is something that you might want to talk about. And then another structural feature that both of them use is enjambment. Now, when we talk about enjambment, and just to remind you all, that's where a sentence starts on one line and runs on to the second, it's used for two reasons, and it depends how you want to approach it. So, enjambment could signify separation, as in a sentence is disjointed, or it could create connection, because what it does allow is for that sentence to flow onto the next line. And what I think is going on here in both of these poems is a bit of both, really. So the enjambment is used to show that disconnection between the poets and their lovers, as in they are separated physically and emotionally from them. However, there is still some element of an emotional connection there on the poet's part. And this idea that they still feel connected to their lovers, which is why they're still harbouring and repressing and trying to process all of these emotions in relation to that relationship ending. Okay? So then for your quotations for structure, you might want to use "in silence and tears for when we two parted," because it is that quote that presents a cyclical structure, because it's used in the first stanza and then it ends with "in silence and tears." And then for neutral tones, we've got this idea of a pond on a winter's day. So the poem starts with Hardy thinking about that relationship ending on a pond on a winter's day, and then it ends with a pond on a winter's day. And the final stanza is in the present tense, and it's Hardy stating that whenever he thinks about love, all he can remember is that moment on that pond on that winter's day of that relationship ending, because it has been so traumatic for him. And that is the essay plan. So I hope that makes sense, and what I would like you to do is recreate this in your exercise books, choose your quotes, annotate them, and then please do self-assess them with the success criteria. Okay? And then this is the work that I would like you to complete next week for the Easter holidays. So because it's Easter holidays, this is the only English work that I'm going to be setting. And that is to complete another comparative grid, but this time you're going to be comparing how poets present control in The Farmer's Bride and Porphyria's Lover. And then when you've completed that grid and you've got the template here, what I would like you to do is self-assess it with the success criteria, please. Okay? So this is next week's homework from Monday the 6th of April to the 13th, which is actually my birthday. Can't wait to spend that in quarantine. Going to be great. But if you do want to keep busy over Easter, please keep your eye out on the school social media for lots of competitions and suggested activities, because there's going to be loads going on. And then to help you with this grid, we've got Knowledge Organiser for The Farmer's Bride, Knowledge Organiser for Porphyria's Lover. We've got our revision wheels, which I've stolen from Faye. We've got our templates, and you've got everything in your exercise book and your anthologies. And just one last message from me. Well done for all of your hard work so far. I'm really proud of you all, and I'm already looking forward to having you back in the classroom. And please submit photos of your grids for a rewards postcard, and enjoy your Easter. Thank you.